Okay.
I'll do your intro and then.
Perfect.
Awesome. Today on Let's Go From Here, we are so excited to welcome Ryan Sprague. He's the founder and co-owner of Highly Optimized. He is also the host of Highly Optimized podcast, the This One Time on Psychedelics podcast, and is the creator of Connect with Cannabis program and the Grow with Cannabis course. Welcome, Ryan.
Welcome,
Thank you so
Ryan.
much. Thank you so much, ladies. I'm so excited to be here and riff with you. You know, we were just getting into so much stuff before we hit record, and it's just amazing how many synchronicities are already coming forth. And that always tells me it's going to be an amazing episode. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being a guest.
Yes.
We're so excited to have you. You were the first person I ever heard speak to cannabis as a psychedelic and consciously connecting with cannabis. And this resonated with me because at the time, that's what I was sort of doing, but I didn't have a vocabulary for it. And I never heard anybody speak to it the way you spoke to it. Has your lens on cannabis always been as a plant ally, or was this something you discovered along your path?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I would say yes, but in terms of the vocabulary and like the actual like belief in it, that formed later on. So when I was growing up, I was a just say no person for a long time. I fell into the propaganda. And, you know, when I was 16, I found cannabis helped me with my generalized anxiety disorder. You know, it was the only thing after trying numerous pharmaceuticals that actually, how I would describe in today's language, allowed me to feel connected to myself. Before that, you know, like many 16-year-olds, I was having I don't know, an eighth life crisis. I wouldn't call it a quarter life crisis, hopefully. I expect to be around a lot longer than that. But, you know, I was having a lot of challenges come up. And, you know, again, when you go to a doctor, they maybe do for all of 5 minutes and they tell you you have anxiety, not that you're experiencing it, but that you have it. And so I started to feel myself get boxed into what someone with anxiety is capable of doing. And so when I found cannabis, I got to have this experience where, again, in today's language, what I would describe is being the observer, where I got to realize that, like, oh, I don't have anxiety, I'm experiencing it. And if I'm experiencing it, then who is the one observing the experience of it? And so that was a really pivotal moment in my life. I didn't know how to make sense of it, but it led me to start questioning everything. You know, because I'd already started to question things, but that gave me some validation in my questioning. And so, like many people, you know, I found something I truly loved in cannabis, and I never got a user manual for the plant, like none of us did, right? And so I was winging it at best, trying to figure out, like, okay, how does this plant work? You know, what are the contexts in which it works? And so there was a lot of trial and error, right? And like many people, I ended up realizing that, like, oh, wow, like I really like this plant a lot. And so what started as something that would help me connect with myself when I was feeling anxious and allow me to really feel what was underlying that anxiety became something that I wanted to do more and more and more of. And so when I left high school, I got into school for psychology. And one morning I woke up, it was on a weekend, and I went to the bathroom and started peeing blood. Had no idea why, right? It was obviously very shocking. And so my father takes me to the hospital, and on the way there, he goes, "Hey, have you been doing drugs?" And I say, "No, but I am smoking a shit ton of pot," is how I put it at that point. And I saw him have a sigh of relief. And my dad was, again, born in the just say no, you know, generation. This is your brain on drugs, all of that. And so to see him have a sigh of relief, you know, I was very heightened because I was so scared in that moment. I saw that and was like, huh, that's interesting. And so when we got to the hospital, I started showing him all the research I'd been doing, because at this point, this was around 2010. And so there's a lot more research coming out at this point. And so my dad, to his, you know, grace, was like, wow, I guess I didn't know what I didn't know. And he didn't have any cognitive dissonance. And so from that point forward, it became something that he was okay with. He was like, listen, you're an adult, you're in school, you know what you want to do with your life. At least you have a good idea. You have a job, you're fulfilling your responsibilities. If this helps you, because he had seen what I had gone through with anxiety, this is great. You know, why don't we continue having you connect with this? And so from that point forward, a couple of years into school, I realized I didn't want to wear khakis the rest of my life, right? And so I went to the Boston Freedom Rally one year, which is a big public display of disobedience, where before it was legal, it was a much bigger deal. Everyone would come out, they would push for legalization, all these speeches, concerts, everything, and you could, you know, connect with cannabis and the cops wouldn't really bother you. And so I get there and I hear someone yelling, "Who wants to make butter with me?" And so I walk over to this guy's little tent that he has set up, and he's passing out these pamphlets for a basic 8-week semester of cannabis education. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And this is one of the first times that I felt a true like hell yes from my heart. Again, I didn't know how to articulate it at that point, but now having had many of those, I know what that was. So I go home and I tell my dad, and I'm like, Dad, there's this thing, I really want to do it. And because I was a broke college student, I'm like, could you help me with tuition? And he goes, I'll do one better. I'll go with you. Because he was just very interested in what I was doing. You know, we always wanted an insight into my world. He used to bring me to metal shows when I was a kid. I don't know what he must have thought with some of these ridiculous experiences, but he was always there to support me, you know, my mother as well. And so we end up going to the school together. And the first day there, I know I'm like, this is exactly where I parked my car. And so he started telling me, listen, if this is what you want, you got to be the first one in that door. You got to be the last one out. Like, really just show them that you're serious about this. So this was right when medical was about to pass as well. And so I get into the school, medical passes, I can now cultivate, and I convince my dad to purchase me a grow kit. You know, my dad's business has taken a big hit in the recession. He needed a good hobby, and I wanted to get into this. And so he buys me this kit. We start cultivating, and our first harvest was terrible. Like, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, right? So I realized, I'm like, okay, now I really want to learn about that, because I'd been learning about the science, the pharmacological aspects, the history of the plant, which if people don't know about the true history of cannabis, it's interesting, at least to say the least about it. And so I started learning about organic regenerative agriculture, Korean natural farming, holistic health. They had a holistic health advocate there. And I just found my whole passion. And so I started getting into all of that. I end up working for the school. I end up interning first and then working for them. And in 2014, I go to my first music festival and I interact with MDMA for the first time. Because at this point, I had obviously tried cannabis, but I was still vehemently against anything else because I really believed the whole your brain's going to rot away and all this stuff. So I try MDMA, and I had done a lot of research beforehand. So I knew, okay, it's a heart opener, whatever that means. And so when I connected with it, I'm in the middle of this crowd in Las Vegas, and I feel this connection to my dad. And I figured, like, well, maybe this is what they meant by heart opener. I'm in Vegas. He likes gambling. I'm going to steakhouses. That's our ritual. And I just chalked it up logically to mean that. When I get home, he let me know that he had just been informed that he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so in that moment, I realized I had no idea how to process that. It was kind of like, hey, I have cancer. Okay, cool. I'm terminal. Okay, awesome. All right, now help me finish uncovering the pool, right? So that was like literally how the conversation went. He didn't know how to handle it either. He didn't want to be viewed as the sick guy. I didn't want to view him as such, but I realized in that moment, like, I don't know how to best support my father. And so he let me know that he wasn't going to take chemo or radiation. And I knew he wasn't going to stop smoking cigarettes and doing the things that, albeit weren't healthy, were also my dad. And I loved him. And so I had this fork in the road appear before me, right? Do I love my dad for the person he's always been, again, albeit maybe unhealthy, but person that's always supported me, person that's raised me, everything like that? Or do I decide selfishly to try to make him into the version of him that I think he should be, so that maybe he can stay around longer, but also I potentially ruin his quality of life in doing so? And so I chose the first fork because I realized that if I had done the other way, I wouldn't have gotten any closure. And so after a couple of weeks, because at this point he still had not connected with cannabis since like the 80s or something. And so after a couple of weeks, I started recommending, once he was experiencing pain, that he interact with RSO, aka Rick Simpson oil. Rick Simpson is the gentleman that brought this form of cannabis into the mainstream. There's also a lot of evidence from cannabis historian Chris Bennett that Jesus's anointing oil was a primitive form of what is now known as FICO, full extract cannabis oil, also RSO. And so when I was at the school, one of the things the school specialized in was helping cancer patients heal their cancer with cannabis. And I know this can sound really outlandish, but for anyone that wants to look this up, you can go on PubMed and look up studies on THC killing cancer cells, CBD inhibiting their growth. Luckily, there's a lot more research out now. And what I also want to make sure I say is, I'm not saying that you can live an unhealthy lifestyle and cannabis will just fix it all for you. I knew it wasn't going to save my father's life, because he wasn't going to stop doing the things that led him to get cancer in the first place. But I also knew it would help with pain. So he agreed reluctantly, because he liked his control in life. He wasn't a drinker. He just smoked cigarettes and ate a lot of bad food. And so at the first time I administered this to him, I would sit with him, right? Every time, the first few times I would administer to him. And during this time, I got to discover the true power of cannabis. I thought I had already figured it out. I thought, I've learned all this stuff. I know cannabis. But during this time, I felt the true ability for the plant to be a connection medicine. And I realized that my dad got to have closure with his grandchildren, his other children, me, my mother, and most importantly, his own mortality. We got to take the heaviness out of subjects like death. We got to look at it as just a graduation, like an exciting thing, right? Like, what do you think happens when I'm going to die? And I'm like, I don't know. He's like, I don't know either. I'm like, are you excited? He's like, kind of, So just those moments where we got to flip the script on kind of like the Achilles heel of humanity, right? Which is what the hell happens when you pass on from this realm. And so he was only given until October. He got diagnosed July 9th. He was only given until October. He ended up lasting all the way until the following June. And when he was getting his scans, his tumors, which he had small cell carcinoma, so it was very aggressive, had slowed their growth by 70% every time. So they were still growing, but they were growing much less fast, basically. And so through that 10 months, I got to have that closure with my father, and he got to keep his dignity and his hair because he had a great head of hair and he didn't want to lose it. And so like I got to give my dad exactly what he wanted, which he wanted to pass at home. And I got to really like have that time with my father that I don't know if I would have gotten if it weren't for administering cannabis. And so after he passed, I was like, this is my mission. I'm gonna really illuminate the long lost power of cannabis that indigenous cultures still know full well, but that in today's age, cannabis has been stigmatized as just this stupid thing, get as high as you want, and that's pretty much it, And so I ended up getting into a dispensary, working with over 5,000 medical patients on a range of different issues. And in 2019, through a series of other very fortunate events, realized I had to leave that dispensary as it got bought out by a corporation. And I realized that I had to do my own thing. And so that's when Highly Optimized was born. That was also when I realized I was connecting with the plant unconsciously still. Even though I was logically only using it once per day, I was using a vaporizer, I grew it myself, all the logical excuses, but they didn't matter once I knew that truth. And so I took 3 months off. And during that time, I took accountability for pretty much the first time in my life of everything in my life. I realized that, hey, no matter what has happened to me in the past, it's up to me to handle it. And if I haven't handled it in the past, I could either go into doom and gloom and victim mentality, or I could realize, actually, now I have all the power because if everything has been my fault in one way, shape, or form, and the reason why I'm not living the life I want to, then I am tasked and able to fix that. And so that then started the last 3 years of my life where I built out, all of this beautiful, beautiful stuff. I've been able to bring 13 groups through the programs, teach people how to cultivate their own, the same way I did at the dispensary, but just a little bit different through the internet. And it's been a beautiful journey. And I'm happy to get into any part of that you guys want to, but that's essentially what allowed me to really see the power of cannabis and take on this whole knowing now that I teach from.
Wow. Mic drop a little bit.
Yeah.
For sharing your journey. That's incredible.
Thank you so much.
I think too, it is really timely now that cannabis, a couple points here. So I think it's really timely that cannabis is now legal in 22 states. We're in this era of awakening, psilocybins are on the rise. I had never thought until Farron had pointed that out to me that cannabis would be a way to connect with your higher self. Yeah. I will say that I think I grew up in your dad's era too, about like DARE, it was like we wore the DARE t-shirts. I think my dad even helped me create an anti-drug poster, which I placed second for it. So I was always anti-drugs. But for me, I was very willing to have this conversation because I'm kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum where cannabis to me has always been a triggersome point. I used it in my youth and I would always get very paranoid and I'd get anxiety and, the gamut. So I kind of stopped. I may have dabbled a little bit in my 20s and 30s, even 40s. But my dad is a habitual pot smoker. So I see that side of people that, abuse it, whether or not he's using it for him. I mean, he's almost 80 years old. He uses it as a form of, he calls it his martini at the end of the day, but he does partake a few times a day. Let's just be honest here. Yeah. So I'm always like, having this negative connotation, like, weed bad. But my dad, he definitely has a spiritual side to him. So it's just interesting to like hear your whole perspective and how you became the objective observer in that versus like having it define you. I think that's like such a key point there. And that for me, it kind of, sparks my curiosity on working with the plants in order to tap into this higher power. And then, of course, like what you did, it propelled change. And also, I mean, I think it's incredible that your dad was so supportive of you on that journey, because I am a mother of a 30-year-old. You're just a little
32,
older than my
yep.
son. And again, it's like, okay, it also encourages me to maybe have this type of conversation with my son, knowing that he does use cannabis as well. So I just thank you so much, first and foremost, for bringing this type of work into the world. Just, kind of my little spiel on that.
I love that.
Yeah, I think it's incredible, and just diving into it. I have so many questions, but the first is, can you just kind of like a 101 for listeners, the difference between like cannabis within cannabis, you have your THC, your CBD, and then I know that you're growing like your own type of weed, like you've kind of fostered this grow facility. Can you just kind of break down like what's the difference between like the cannabinoids, the THC, CBD, and then like I've heard you grow like Indica or Sativa, or you're both, maybe just a little like 101 breakdown, like grassroots, no pun intended here, just like about weed itself.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, when we look at cannabis, and I'll also go over cannabis versus hemp, because this confuses a lot of people, and it confused me for a while too. Like, they're essentially the same plant. It's just that anything that's 0.3% of Delta 9 THC or lower is classified as hemp, and anything that's above that is classified as cannabis. Now, it does get a little more complicated, but in terms of law, that's how the law looks at it. And so when you're looking into cannabis, basically, cannabis interacts with our endocannabinoid system, which is something that all of us have. It's the largest regulatory system in our body, and it's the only one that has two-way communication, right? So it's the only one that has mind-body connection that speaks back and forth, right? And so this system is in all of us, right? And within our system, we have what's called endocannabinoids. And these are endogenous cannabinoids, right? So they're made endogenously within us. The two most popular are anandamide. Ananda comes from the Sanskrit word bliss, right? So when you have a runner's high, it's classified as anandamide, right? So when you have a workout, a great workout, right, you have a lot of anandamide. The other one is 2-AG. It's a very long name, but 2-AG is the abbreviation for it. And so these are created in your body, right? So in the endocannabinoid system, you have CB1 receptors, which are in the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. And you have the CB2 receptors, which are in the peripheral nervous system and a lot of the immune cells and things like that. And so different cannabinoids go to different cannabinoid receptors. And so what like the main thing is here is that depending on your individual endocannabinoid system makeup, cannabis can work dramatically different from person to person. And so that's why, like on a scientific level, why so many people have such skewed results with cannabis. The other thing too is depending on your metabolization rate, edibles specifically, which are a very slippery slope. I think anyone who's been in the world of cannabis for a while has an edible story, right? Where an experience turned into an ordeal, and so like, again, depending on your liver metabolization, if you're a slow metabolizer of THC, which I am, and so like what I want to articulate also is it's not based on, weight or anything like that. Like I'm a very skinny person, but I have a slow metabolizing liver, which makes me a cheap date, right? But also it also like prevents me from like processing cannabis that quickly. And so if someone out there is listening to this and they're like, yeah, every time I eat an edible, no matter how weak it is or how low of a dose it is, I just get hit really hard. That's a good sign that you're a slow metabolizer. Whereas a fast metabolizer, like my girlfriend, she could have 100 milligram edible and be like, am I supposed to feel something? Right. So again, just because you might not be a daily user doesn't mean that you might not have like a higher tolerance, right? Now, typically speaking, the more you connect with the plant, the higher your tolerance will get. But sometimes like people forget that. And when I worked at the dispensary, I find it more in women, and I'm not like sure if this is an actual thing, but this is just what I noticed in doing it. Women would be able to handle cannabis a little bit better than men in terms of strength. And that's just something I've noticed. So I'm not going to go on the record and say it's a science thing or anything, but that's what I noticed overall. And so when you're looking into what cannabis to purchase, you're typically going to see indica, sativa, or hybrid. But it's kind of a thirst trap because everything these days is pretty much a hybrid, right? Everything is a cross of a cross of a cross. This started happening in the 70s and 80s when people started going over to the Middle East and bringing back indica, like classic indica type strains, and breeding them into the heirloom and landrace sativas that were coming from like Mexico and these tropical regions, right? And this all really happened in like Northern California. That's where all of this stuff really started to happen in the Emerald Triangle, in those three counties. I think it's Humboldt, Trinity, and I always forget the third one, but those three areas that are the Emerald Triangle together. And so when that started happening, it became hard to tell whether something was an indica or a sativa. And so what I tell everyone these days is that it's kind of a myth now, right? The indica sativa hybrid thing. I will use those terms when I'm describing a plant's growth structure. Like if someone says, hey, how does this grow? I'll say it grows short and stout like an indica, or tall and lanky like a sativa. But most things are hybridized because, for instance, like for an equatorial sativa, you would have to live in a place where you could flower that for like 16 weeks, which most people can unless you live very close to the equator. So basically what happened was people started hybridizing things to make them able for more people to grow them in, like, say, Boston, where I live, or even like, the Pacific Northwest and Alaska, places like that. And so a much better way these days to empower yourself with like the ability to kind of contextualize what experience you can expect to have is with understanding terpenes. So terpenes are the essential oils of the plant, essentially, right? And so these terpenes are found in many different things. That's why certain cannabis can smell like oranges. It can smell like lemons. It can smell like lavender. It can smell like any of these other things, right? And so with cannabinoids and terpenes together, this is the analogy I give. Cannabinoids are your gas and brake pedal. So if you see something that's like 30% delta 9 THC, that's kind of like a muscle car. It's going to go very fast, right? But you don't really know in what direction it's going to go unless you know the terpenes. So if you understand the terpene profile, which most dispensaries now are getting, hip to putting the terpenes on there, you can study these and see, for instance, like myrcene, which is the most abundant terpene found in cannabis, most associated with like mangoes and things like that. That's a very relaxing terpene. So if you see something that's like 30% and it has a high myrcene content, you can assume that, or imagine that that's going to be a very relaxing and strong experience, right? So think of your classic indica experience. On the other hand, if you see like a high terpinolene or pinene or limonene, and let's say your cannabinoids are showing 30% delta 9 THC, you can assume or imagine that's going to be a very stimulating and strong experience. And so what I love to break down is the science and the spirituality of like why someone might get anxiety or have anxiety or experience that, right? So put it this way, when we interact with cannabis, it produces a sympathetic nervous system response on onset. So if someone fails to check in and be self-aware as to where their nervous system is already at, and then they connect with the plant, they can have a anxious reaction to their heart beating fast and these kind of things. Now, it's not that cannabis caused that anxiety necessarily, right? On a physiological level, yes, the sympathetic nervous system, but for certain people, they can connect with cannabis and they're in a very relaxed state before they connect with it, and they don't get that same anxiety. And so whenever there's no objectivity to something, it has to be more subjective. And so what I tell people is that if you're connected with a plant, your end of the bargain is you must check in first to make sure that you're fit to consume this plant, right? Understanding that it might trigger this sympathetic nervous system, which might put you over the edge and start producing anxiety. Now, how I say it on a more spiritual level, more qualitative level, is that cannabis acts like a mirror. And I'll go into like the three ways that I think about cannabis. First being a mirror. And most plant medicines work in this way, right? Where they illuminate yourself to yourself. So cannabis moves you from beta brainwaves into alpha and theta, which is the doorway to the subconscious, which is usually, quote unquote, protected by the ego and the default mode network, aka they're protecting you from what might be lurking in your subconscious. But most people will find like they have coping strategies and things like that. They don't really know why they don't feel good when they're alone or when they have a lot of space in their life, but they're not really sure. So the opportunity that cannabis and these other medicines can give you is to actually feel those things fully in order to heal them. But what all too often happens is people externalize their power and go, oh, the plant made me anxious. It made me paranoid. It made me lazy, right? When in reality, it's just really illuminating what's underneath the surface for you, you know? And I made this mistake for many years, you know, and that's why I can speak to it because I've gone through it, you know? And what I tell people is it's not about right or wrong or any of that. It's just about like, how can we be the most empowered versions of ourselves when we're choosing to interact with the great power that is plant medicine? And with great power comes great responsibility. And one of those responsibilities is to be able to learn the lessons it teaches us, because like we were talking about a little bit before we hit record, like the idea is not that cannabis is the moon or sun, right? It's the finger that can point you back to the moon or sun when you get disoriented. And so like it can be a reminder. Let's say that you just don't know what you don't know. You've been moving very fast, go, go, go. Every once in a while, it's nice to get a zoomed out view and be like, are my actions in alignment with what I truly want? And what do I truly want? And is it what I'm actually doing in my day-to-day life? And that process can definitely bring up anxiety and paranoia and depression and these kind of things, right? Because it's kind of like the dark night of the soul or the midlife crisis where you realize like, oh my goodness, I actually don't know who I am. And that's the potential of these types of medicines. And so I tell everyone, like, you don't need these things to get that reaction. Like you can easily work with coaches, therapists, other modalities. What I always say, though, is in the modern day world, with all of our busyness and things on our to-do lists, it can help sometimes to have like a rocket ship instead of like a car to get there, right? And so the other two ways that I think about cannabis are, other than a mirror, are that it's feminine medicine, which, you know, a lot of people wonder why, you know, people believe cannabis makes us lazy, right? It doesn't make us lazy. It's just that it's very feminine. So it can create this space in our lives. It can allow us to essentially be fulfilled staring at a wall and just allow ourselves to really down regulate after that sympathetic nervous system response goes in. And so if we fail to provide the masculine component, whether we're male or female, of setting an intention and asking the medicine and knowing why we're there and what we're looking to do, and then we end up just sitting on the couch all day, well, it's not the fault of the plant. It's that we didn't understand how the plant worked and that it was going to put us in that state. And so I tell everyone, like, if you have stuff to do and you choose to connect with a strain that's going to be relaxing, it's up to you to have the discipline to go, okay, I might feel super relaxed, but I got stuff I got to do, right? And so the third way is imagination medicine. And so in order to create anything new in life, right, this microphone was in someone's imagination before it actually came out to manifest in 3D. This water jug, same thing, right? Everything is an idea that comes from imagination before it's actually a real thing. And in today's world, like, imagination needs space from which to come forth. And we're lacking in space as a society, especially in Western countries. And so the idea is that in order to create a new experience of life, you first have to imagine that a new life is possible. And that's not the whole equation, right? And that's why I say plant medicines, they can show you the what. And this can be a thirst trap for a lot of people because they think that the ceremony or the connection with this plant is going to solve their problems. In reality, it can give you like, hey, this is a breadcrumb trail to follow, the same way a coach might be able to help you figure out a problem in your life, but you still have to go do the work to figure out the how thereafter. And so if people understand that, mirror, feminine medicine, and imagination medicine, I find that to be good practical advice along with the scientific information of the endocannabinoid system, cannabinoids, and terpenes to be able to actually walk away from an episode and go, okay, I'll go try this out. And what I always say is, I don't want anyone to ever take what I say at face value. I want you to go test this yourselves, right? Like, my ultimate intention is I don't mind what anyone chooses to believe about life, cannabis, plant medicines, etc., so long as it's their belief on it and it's not something they picked up just from someone else. And so I tell everyone, like, don't take my word for it. Go try it out. See if this works for you. The plant's definitely not for everyone, but it does call on certain people, you know? And so if you're one of those people, try these things out and see how it works for you.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak to that a little because sometimes when I've used cannabis since my 20s, which was very much a numbing state, into my 30s, kind of dissipated a little bit, wasn't using as much. But then when I started on my own healing journey, was using it and meditating. And when sometimes anxiety and fears would come up, and I had the wherewithal to kind of know, like, okay, I don't know why this is coming up, but this is energy I have in my body that needs to move through. Can I turn towards this? Okay, I'm having
Mm,
anxiety right now. Like, okay, let me love this. Let me allow it. And that
mm,
really, it's really helped me move through fears and anxieties personally once I had the understanding of
mm.
what it was doing. And I also deal with, like, I have the programming of, anti-drugs. I need to hide if I'm stoned from people. People
Yeah.
can't know, they'll judge me or I can get in trouble. And I connect with cannabis. I have epiphanies and I'm able to integrate, like, conceptual experiences and embody them. Like you were talking about feminine plant, I'm able to, like, really integrate. And then on the other side, I also have, like, this kind of programming of a little bit of shame embedded to using
Mm,
it. When I look to the wellness industry, I often see, also through my own lens, but
mm.
see a lot of people put down cannabis and, like, it's in the same boat as alcohol and it's just this kind of numbing plant. And even doing this podcast and on another podcast, I did talk about how I connected with cannabis, and it brings up, like, anxiety for me personally to just even admit it and put it out there. But I felt like I need to show gratitude to this plant because it has done so much for my personal growth. And obviously it is not for everybody. And I'm not saying everybody's going to have this same experience. Obviously we are not, but it has for me. And I think I owe it to the plant to put it out there that this is something that is possible, that to open kind of the doorway to the conversation of, if you're willing to, maybe if it calls to you, to try it, because you could have a lot of amazing realizations and it can help your spiritual growth, obviously, with the line of when you're using it to numb or, not being conscious around it.
Definitely. Yeah, it's so interesting you mentioned that because one of the main things I help people with ends up becoming their shame and guilt story around cannabis. And what I let them know is like, listen, people in today's world think they have things figured out. They think they know things, right? And for me, when you look back at the history of cannabis, especially with Chris Bennett's research, there's a book right there. It's called Liber 420, Cannabis, Magical Herbs, and the Occult. It's a 750-page book surrounding the fact that cannabis has been used in every occult practice since the dawn of time, right? And he's proven that cannabis has co-evolved alongside humans for over 10,000 years, right? So the fact it's almost like astrology and these kind of things, right? Where someone goes, that's bullshit. And I'm like, okay, so you mean there's over 10,000 years worth of research in all these different areas, but you figured it out and you're 100 years or less on the planet. Cool, right? Like for me, that's something that is super weird to me, like, and again, like, I'm not saying that I haven't fallen into that in the past, and that's why I can see it now. It's so weird to think that we're ever going to know anything. And that's why I always say the ultimate muscle that we must evolve as individuals is discernment, because, and this is why I talk about cannabis in the way that I talk about it. I don't say it's the end all be all. I don't say it's for everyone, because it's definitely not. And I never want someone to hear me talk and go, okay, I'm going to go try it because Ryan says it, right? Like the ultimate thing I want people to do is to get curious and really create enough space in their lives to understand and discern whether or not this plan is correct for them in their lives, because it's also very easy for your ego to develop stories surrounding why you can continue connecting with this plant to numb out, right? But my ultimate message is that don't blame the plant for your own shortcomings, right? And again, I speak as someone who numbed out with cannabis for years, but realized like, oh, that wasn't the plant's fault. And to the degree that I externalized my power onto it, I was just really screwing myself over, And I think that's what we're all talking about here is like, hey, whether it's nicotine or alcohol or anything, right? Like, there's a great book called The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. And in this book, he talks about this individual. He's a young kid at, I think, Berkeley, actually, track star. And he goes to this gas station late at night one night, meets this older gentleman that he nicknames Socrates, super wise. And basically, this guy starts teaching him about vegetarianism, don't have casual sex, all these things, right? So Dan ends up getting super strict, right? Like, I'm not ever going to do these things again, right? And so Socrates knows this is going to happen. And at the ultimate point where Dan's like, yeah, I'm a vegetarian. I can't even, be around my friends to eat meat. I would never drink, all these kind of things. One night, Socrates like, hey, you want to go out? And he's like, sure. And so Socrates lights up a cigarette and Dan's like, what are you doing? Like, what, are you kidding me? He's like, yeah, do you want to go get a drink? And he's like, what are you doing? And he's like, listen, there's no bad action, just bad habits, right? You can't blame these things. They're not what has power over you. You are giving your power away, right? So again, like the whole lesson there is like, whether it be anything in life, whether it be pornography, bad food, bad relationships, whatever it is, we ultimately the only ones that can fix that for ourselves. And if we can choose to have a very healthy relationship with these things from discernment. And so I'm glad you brought that up because, yeah, what I found is that with anything in life, right? Like I love Taoism because they talk about how the middle way is the way. And I'm a big student of Hermetic principles as well. And when you understand the law of polarity, there's just polarity everywhere these days. Be a vegan, be a carnivore. Eggs are amazing. They'll cure your cancer. Eggs are terrible. They'll give you cancer, right? There's no in the middle. And I feel that polarizes everyone, right? So we have this camp of like, smoke weed all day, every day, and won't give you cancer to, hey, this is going to rob you of all your power. It's like, well, what if the middle way was the way, right? What if you could discern what is my intention for going into this? Do I discern that this medicine feels intuitively correct for me to help me in this? And then also, do I understand that it's up to me after that experience to make sure I do the work to integrate it, And so I love having these conversations because I really feel the world is craving more of this middle way approach right now.
Agreed. It's all about the middle space, neutrality on pretty much anything. I listened to a podcast in prep about it, and you said something, it's kind of tagging on to what you had mentioned about like, there's no bad decisions, just bad habits, but really about anything that you can't quit for 3 days has power over you.
Yes.
Right. Like, yes. I think that's like, right. That to me is like the essence of this conscious cannabis usage.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really like resonated with me. And I kind of want to bring up one of those questions to some of the people that I love, because I just, to kind of get them to really think about, why they use, is this, are you getting something from this? Are you using this with intention versus numbing? I had a question though, and you kind of answered a little bit about the 3 aspects, it's the mirror, it's connecting with the feminine, and then it's all about imagination. My question to you is, when you are going into ceremony, I will call it, or when you're choosing to interact, how are you preparing yourself for it? And also, like, how often are you using? I don't want to say using. How often are you partaking or working?
Yeah, no, this is a great question, and it's something that I love expanding on because I tell everyone, and this is another huge part of what I do in my work with Connect with Cannabis and now the Conscious Cannabis Collective that I'm creating, is like, I tell everyone there is no right or wrong, right? That's simply a duality made in the mind. And so I never want anyone to hear what I say and go, oh, I have to do it the way Ryan does, right? And so I'll state exactly how I do it so that hopefully maybe someone goes, oh, that sounds cool. I'll try that out, right? But the 3 days thing is kind of like what I found with the hundreds of clients I've helped with this is like a really good like foundation, right? Like if you can't take 3 days off from something, you probably are hiding something from yourself. And I say probably because, again, there is no objectivity to life. I've met people that are able to connect with the plant daily that to me just really feel they have a healthy relationship. But I'd say for 99% of the population, including myself, that was not the case, And once I stopped lying to myself about that, my relationship with the plant was able to go so much deeper because the plant was like, okay, now you really get it. I'm not the one to blame here, right? Now we can start diving into deeper lessons. And so for me, my frequency, and I'll dive into what it kind of looks like when I engage in ceremony, my frequency that I've come to is Monday through Friday, no cannabis. And the reason I came to that was because I realized that my own personal pattern of numbing out with the plant was interacting with it when I was stressed out, right? To relieve stress. And what I realized was that Monday through Friday is when I'm doing all of my stuff. And that was the time I was most prone to stress. It was also the time where I had the least amount of space from which cannabis could actually, help me, right? And so like plant medicines can only help you to the degree that you have space to allow them in, right? It's almost like if you have a traffic jam, are you going to put more cars in the traffic jam and try to make it better? No, right? And so for me, what I found was Monday through Friday, if I abstain from cannabis, on a scientific level, it's keeping my endocannabinoid system nice and flushed, which preserves the transcendental and spiritual properties of the plant. When you look into shamanic cultures and you look into like my buddy Hamilton Souther, they all do the same thing. They say, hey, we connect with it twice per week, usually on the weekends is actually what they do too. I'm not sure if that's, something they've been doing for years, but when I read Cannabis and Spirituality years after I started this, which is a book by my buddy Stephen Gray, and there was an interview with Hamilton and some other shamans in there, they were saying that. And I was like, that's very interesting. So on the weekends, I have more space from which the plant medicine can help me in. And here's how I do this, right? So during the weeks, whenever I feel a trigger come up, whenever I feel just like, frustrated, anxious, anything, I keep note of it in my notebook, right? I just put small little notes. Like on Wednesday, I noticed I was overwhelmed, right? And then maybe some of the things I noticed, well, I had a really packed schedule that day, things like that, because I'm very aware of certain patterns of mine to burnout, to say yes to too many things, not have clear boundaries, things like that. So I'm watching those things closely. So I'll take little notes down. And then when Saturday comes, what I'll do is I'll make my intention to go into either one or maybe a group of those things if they have a similar, like, kind of vibe to them. I'll make my intention to go specifically into those. And the statement that I use in almost every intention is, please help me, show me, and teach me as to what I need to know to move through this successfully. And so then I'll get some HIGHdeas, some insights, things like that. Yeah, HIGHdeas.
Yes.
The ultimate term.
I love that.
It's so funny.
That's amazing.
That came to me during a ceremony. And I really believe that like cannabis and a lot of these other plant medicines are just so comedic in nature. And if laughter is the best medicine, like I'm not exactly sure what that means, but every time I have these insights, it's always like this really giggly, like childlike experience. And although I'm not religious, I know a good line when I hear it, right? Which the Bible states, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must first enter the mind of a child. And so I've always kept like my eye on that, because that's just interesting to me that, if laughter is the best medicine, cannabis specifically is known for laughter, right? Among many other things, but that's been very interesting. And so what I do is, like, let's say on Saturday, I have these HIGHdeas come through. I then, let's say, look at my calendar. Maybe when the HIGHdea comes through, like, hey, you really need to stop putting so much in your schedule, right? And usually I'll have some like, no, but I can do it all, right? And the classic, non-essentialist point of view. And so I'll look at my schedule for the next week, and I'll see those days that look like that one that I got stressed out at. And typically, as I'm coming back to sobriety, that voice is like, no, dude, this week will be different. You could totally do it different. And that's my cue to be like, okay, I'm going to take the opposite. So then I'll reach out to who I need to reach out to and get my schedule less constricted. And then what I'll do is during that next week, I'll see how that works. And then whatever I come up with that week, I'll go into ceremony that week. Some weeks I have an awesome week. Like actually for the last month, I haven't connected with cannabis at all. I've just been having I've been integrating still what I've been learning. Everything's been working well so far. I'm sure I'll find something, but everything's been working. I just felt like right now I'm actually good. So there's times where I'll take a month off. There's times where, if I'm on vacation and I have a lot of space, I might do 7 days in a row, right? And what I tell everyone is, when I first started this, when I went from daily use for like 10 years into this totally new paradigm, I took a 3-month break and then I set myself clear structure, like only weekends. And I stuck to that for about 2.5 years, where I did not budge from that whatsoever, because I wanted to prove to myself over and over that I could have this new relationship. But there also becomes a certain point where that structure might actually inhibit someone. And so from there, it became much more flowy and much more like cooking than baking, right? If that makes sense, And so again, most of my weeks, it's Monday through Friday, no cannabis. Saturday and Sunday are my optional days that I can connect with it. Sometimes Saturday, I get all the downloads and HIGHdeas I need. Sometimes on Sundays, there's something that after like really sitting with what I got, I'm like, yeah, but that, I don't know. I don't know if I understand that perfectly. I'm looking at my calendar. I'm like, I want to go back in and see if I can figure this out. So that's normally what it looks like for me when I'm going into it. And when I'm preparing myself for it, I use a 4-step process. We call this the highly optimized way. First one we already talked about, make sure you're taking a 3-day minimum break per week, not because it's right or wrong, but because if you're looking to connect with the medicine as a medicine or teacher, and you want to preserve the transcendental and spiritual properties, on a scientific level, we can't have a clogged endocannabinoid system to do that, right? So I don't want anyone to think I'm ever trying to tell people what's right or wrong, but just like that's literally how shamanic cultures practice it too, to allow the medicine to truly bring you to those places. So first step, take that 3-day break. The second step is now when you're connecting with the medicine, you set an intention, right? So what I'm going to be doing is actually looking at like what's coming up for me, what feels like I'm really going to, be able to get something from this. After I've set my intention, I'm then going to go into ceremony. And so there's a lot of different definitions for ceremony, and it's a buzzword these days. The way that I look at it is, what is a practical ceremonial container from which the intention I have can play out within? So a lot of people hit me up, does this mean I could never use cannabis at a concert again? I'm like, no, not necessarily, right? But is that ceremonial container, right? And I know it might be silly to call a concert a ceremonial container, but is that container practical for what you're looking for, right? Are you looking to go dance and let loose and maybe see a friend and just have fun? Maybe that is a practical container, right? But for me, I know most of the time I'm looking to be by myself, with myself, maybe with my partner as well, to dive in and get some inner awareness. And so for me, what that looks like is I have my office here. I have my altar set up. I have my biogeometry cube on there to harmonize my space. I do, a sage cleanse and a Palo Santo reinvigoration of the energy in the room. And then I do a 7-directional prayer. The mystery school actually calls it the affirmation to healing, but it's basically a 7-directional prayer. And then from there, what I do is I speak my intention directly into the flower. And then my preferred method of ingestion is vaporizing. And so from there, I'll break the flower up with my hands to connect to it. I'll smell it as I'm doing it to prime my olfactory system, and then I'll connect with it. Sometimes, usually I'm making a blend, so I'll mix different strains together. This is something I've always called making a salad. Daniel McQueen calls it he has different names, but the one that I usually use that's similar to his is a blend of one classic Indica strain, one classic Sativa, one classic hybrid. Of course, everything's kind of a hybrid these days, like I already mentioned. So something that's Indica dominant, right? Indica dominant in terms of terpenes, Sativa dominant in terms of terpenes, and hybrid in terms of like a mixture. And from there, what you're able to do is you're able to get an increased entourage effect, which basically the entourage effect is that if you have more of the constituents all together, they all help each other work better. And so you can have a much more psychedelic experience with cannabis when you're mixing different strains together. So oftentimes I'm mixing 7 to 10 different strains that I've cultivated together, and then I'm vaporizing that, and then I'm going through my ceremony. And so with regards to ceremony, I have many different types of ceremonies I go through depending on what I'm feeling and, again, what intention I'm creating. So in Connect with Cannabis, we have 10 unique modalities we bring people through. So this could be anything from, doing parts work, journaling work, limiting belief work, using essentially musical therapy, right? The way I do that is look at what songs are currently on repeat in your life and, make a playlist of those. And in the sober state, start asking yourself what you think those songs represent to you, then connect with the plant, listen to them, and feel what comes out, and then journal after, right? So these are just examples. And again, like it could be as simple as just laying down and meditating, right? It could be as simple as doing breath work, taking a walk in the woods, these kind of things. But then after when I come out, I'm looking everything over, making a plan, putting it into action. And that's why I love cannabis, because if you take 5 grams of mushrooms, although you'll have a profound experience most of the time, it can be hard to come out of that and immediately start integrating. And for most people, they have families, they have busy lives, right? And cannabis is just very practical. You can be from starting a ceremony to finish in about 2 hours. It could be like an after dinner thing, and you can still go watch a movie with your kids, your family, etc. after. And so it's just very practical. And so that's what it looks like for me. That's how right now I'm connecting with the plant. That's how I prepare myself for it, my space, and how often I connect with it.
That's beautiful. Do you have that in a downloadable PDF for people?
I do, actually. Yes, I have the Conscious Cannabis Guide. I'm actually finishing up a whole new version of it that'll be live by the time this goes live. So yeah, I'll make sure you ladies get that. And it's super cool. It goes over the highly optimized way in much more detail. And then it goes over the 3 ways to understand cannabis that we talked about, but in much more detail as well. So yeah, that gives everyone what they need to know to get a huge head start. And they'll have a lot to work with from that as well.
It's amazing.
Yeah. There's so much information, and cannabis are not just practical, great introspection and intention. Like these are all things that you can live by with or without anything.
Absolutely.
I'm curious on your 7-directional prayer. Maybe you send it to us afterwards, because I'm Farron and I are both daily meditators and stuff. And I'm always every day my prayer, whatever I use to call in it's a little different. It's kind of what I'm feeling, but I call in like the elements and the direct, the four corners of the earth and or the universe and all that. So I'm curious on that.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah,
also, go ahead.
it's
Sorry, go ahead.
oh no, it's super fun. Like Mystery School has theirs, which is the same every time, right? You say it the same way. What I love about the 7 directional prayer is you can find scripts online, but the way that I learned it from a couple of friends that have trained with indigenous cultures is you kind of just do it different every day, right? So the north usually represents like the harsh winter, challenges that you're grateful for. You can do the east where the sun rises, life, gets born. The south where the summer, like this really nice warm climate comes from, this warmth, you can make it whatever you want. And then after you do west, you do to the sky, to the ground, and then also to your center, to your heart. And it's super cool. I love being able to kind of like riff on what I'm feeling that particular day. And then also some days I'm like, I'm just going to go with the one that I do at the mystery school that's scripted. So yeah, it's super fun.
I love that. I feel like I'm already kind of doing that already.
Yeah, exactly.
Father Sky, Mother Earth, always in the heart. Amazing. Also, one more thing too.
Yeah.
I know you sell product as well. Because you grow, are you selling the cannabis as well? And
Yeah.
are you putting little disclaimers on what you sell?
So I don't.
The grow process too, and the energy that goes into the plants and what you're then ingesting.
Yeah. So I'm glad you guys asked this because I get this question a lot. I don't sell anything. I'm a grower for myself. And what I do is I gift cannabis. So like if I'm at an event with someone, I'm happy to gift them. People are always asking me, how do I get your cannabis? I'm like, you're going to have to come to Paul Check's house when I'm there or when I'm on a vacation or something like that. But my favorite thing to do is teaching people how to cultivate it. That's kind of like the other side of what we chatted about with the more practical, like, kind of shamanic side of looking at it. And it's a huge epidemic in the world of cannabis right now that not many people are talking about, but certain people, especially like Hamilton Southern, people that are a part of like, indigenous shamanic cultures are very aware of. And if you read The Adventures of Don Juan, when he goes down to meet Don Juan, he essentially talks to him about the plant allies they call on, which are called the weed and the smoke. And the weed is not actually cannabis. It's like some other plant. And basically he's like, oh, could I try some of yours? And he's like, no, what are you talking about? You got to grow it yourself. That's the only way it really works, right? The plants have to choose which one, like out of these two allies, you have to try both after you've grown them and figure out which one resonates with you. And so with cannabis, you think about, especially in the corporate cannabis world, what the energy is in a dispensary that's growing their cannabis from a place of greed, paying their workers very low income. No diss on most of the growers out there, but they're not really aware of doing inner work and these kind of things. Many are, right? But it's not the norm yet. And why would it be? Like this isn't really like a value that society is painted as being important, right? Like many people are into now meditating and taking care of themselves, but it's not like I blame the growers for it. It's just something that, again, it's kind of lost in translation. And so what I found is that it's very important when you're cultivating medicine to make sure you're checking your own energy before you go into the room, making sure that you have something like biogeometry, harmonizing the space in there, especially if you're growing indoor and you have EMFs and things like that. And that you're like growing your plants with love, and that's why like women grown cannabis is typically just awesome, because it's not that, men are bad at growing or anything. It's just that men usually bring this like very like, let's get shit done energy into there. And that's not necessarily bad, but when you can bring presence into there and you can bring this like gratitude feeling, and women, you guys are connected to the earth in a way men just aren't. Not that we can't learn it, but again, it's just very natural for you. And so like, I've always found that some of the best flower I've ever connected with, and really where I took a lot of inspiration of how I grow my plants, is from women, and it's so cool. There's a place up in Maine that grows a lot of hemp products called Rooted Heart Remedies. And it's like a bunch of women that grow there, and it's the best hemp ever. And the cool thing about hemp is you can buy it in all 50 states. So yeah, that's what I always tell everyone is if you're interested, like in learning how to fish, instead of me just giving you a fish, like I can teach you how to cultivate, and it's very simple. Like it's actually not rocket science whatsoever. I grow organically, right? So everything I do is organic. I eat organic, everything like that. So for me, like the analogy I give is with chemical salt nutrients and fertilizers, it's kind of like the steroids of the plant world. So we all know now in 2023 that someone is not healthy necessarily, anyway, usually not at all, if they're on steroids, right? They might look amazing, but like, hey, how's your heart doing? How are your organs, et cetera, right? So we realize that like we can't just look at someone's appearance and think that they're healthy based on that, you know? And so when it comes to cannabis, people are seeing this essentially steroid cannabis that's 35% THC and all of these things. But again, what is the energy of chemical salt nutrients and a plant being grown in that way? When it wants to grow in the earth, it wants to be connected to mycorrhizal networks. It wants to be connected to nature, you know? And so how I cultivate, I talk about it paradoxically a lot, is like, yes, we're growing cannabis, but in the really paradoxical way, if we do everything right, really all you're doing is making the best soil with high microbial health. And if you do it right, your plant will grow as a side effect. And all you need to do is just make sure that the plant doesn't run into any issues, right? If you're growing outdoor, it doesn't get eaten by deer or rabbits because they love cannabis too. If you're growing indoor, that you're training your plants to make sure you don't have height restriction issues and things like that. And so in a paradoxical way, like, it's super easy to cultivate in the way I do. And it's really fun too. You know, there's something to, if you've ever grown your own vegetables or anything, like it's very similar, like getting to put your love every day into something, checking on it. And then when that plant, you know, leaves its form and gets harvested, you get to connect with that. And it's a great way to also understand your own energy, right? Because if you grew that plant and then you interact with it and you feel anxiety and these kind of things, right, coming up, well, you can start to understand like, okay, was this plant grown in an environment that was anxious? Maybe I need to fix something, right? Also, like we were talking about before, is it just bringing up maybe that I thought I was a bad grower, right? And these kind of things. So, you know, again, that one's a little more like cooking than baking. It's hard to be precise with it, but, you know, there's a great way to be able to interact with yourself in a way that's really hard to do in a sober state by connecting with the medicine that you grew. And it's an amazing thing too, to like be able to share with friends. Like, if you think about true cannabis culture, not the kind that we see all over the place these days, but I mean, you do still see it, but like think about Bob Marley, for instance. Like he, to me, really represents what true cannabis culture is about. He had all the money in the world and all he wanted to do was live in his same house, be with his friends and family and play soccer. Like that's really like what cannabis is about, you know, as I find. And again, you don't need cannabis to access that stuff, but in a very busy world that's very far away from true human nature, it can be the reminder that a lot of people require to click back into being in alignment with their soul and why they're truly here.
I love that. One kind of tactical question here, as we're getting close to wrapping up.
Yeah.
I know you used the term vaporizing. Is that code for a bong, or what is that? Because I don't know. I'm not a habitual pot smoker, and then also, or a pot, or I'm not a cannabis user.
It's okay. You're good.
I know. See how I just jumped to that, right?
Exactly.
So,
I tell everyone.
Programmed in my head too.
Totally.
Exactly.
But not to cut you off. Also, I would love to meet you at Paul Check's house if that's what you were doing in San Diego. So I will.
Yes.
You're on here.
Paul is
an invitation. I am in.
And we'd like a free sample.
Yes, 100%. That's what I love doing is like, for me, like the fun I really get from it is like gifting people an experience. Like, hey, this is me. Like, go try this out and tell me what HIGHdeas it brings up. Like, tell me who you connected with it with. Like, tell me what laughs you had. Like, to me, I think the best gift that anyone can give anyone is an experience, right? Like, rather than me tell anyone, like, this is what you're going to feel, like, hey, choose your own adventure, you know? And so that's why I get so smitten, you know, being able to gift any extra I have away and just get to, you know, have people say, hey, I tried that with my friend. We went on this amazing walk. There was a sunset. That like really like just is such a good feeling in my heart that very few things match. And that's like one of the ultimate fulfillments I get from cultivating the plant, is just gifting it and seeing what people have from it. It's really cool.
Yeah. And you're speaking so much to the energetics of everything. And I think like we go through our day and we don't pay attention to it, but it's like, okay, when I'm doing this thing, what ideas are coming to my head? What am I feeling? Like whether it's driving or connecting with cannabis or doing the laundry, whatever you're doing during the day, you're having subconscious thoughts come up and we think that they're random, but they're really connected to what kind of energy exchange we're having at the moment. And it's so good to think about that. And when you're connecting with cannabis and using different strains or wherever you got it or whatever situation you're in, like think about it, like, okay, am I having a hard time right now or is it a beautiful time right now? And that's something to contemplate. And
Definitely.
you didn't answer, Heather, what a vapor.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
No, but I love that though. It is a way of like, we're just consciously like co-creating with the universe always, whether we're aware of it or not. And Yeah, I mean, cannabis seems like you said, a rocket ship kind of sure shot way to tap in when we need to, based
Definitely.
on, our busy daily lives. But yeah, could you, and then also the other question I just want to tack on,
Mhm.
is there a difference like rolling a joint versus smoking in a pipe? Like that can't be good for you, right? Can't be good for the
Yeah.
lungs, but maybe just expand a little bit on vaporization.
Absolutely. So vaporization is the idea of like vaporizing instead of combusting. So for me, like smoking of any sort is not going to be good for your lungs, right? Like a lot of people don't want to hear this, but, and trust me, I didn't want to at one point either, but we have to be aware of that, right? Like putting smoke in your lungs, smoke is not meant to go there. So vaporizing, on the other hand, while vaporizing is still inhaling something, it's extremely healthy compared to smoking. So with vaporizing, you're not actually combusting. You're essentially creating a vapor out of it by heating it just to the point where the cannabinoids, the terpenes, and the other constituents of the plant are able to be consumed in an inhalation method without combusting it. Because when you combust it, you're getting a lot of carcinogens in there, tar, things like that. Also, let's talk about what we use to smoke things like a lighter, a butane lighter. You're dousing your flower in butane and then you're inhaling that. I mean, again, these kind of things are things that I didn't think about for a long time. And so when I got into vaporizing, it was because obviously, like if I'm healthy in every other aspect of my life, why am I not going to look into this? And for me, edibles, for the reasons aforementioned, like are a little strange. So I'll use an edible from time to time, but I much prefer inhalation methods. So I stick with a vaporizer. Funny thing to know too is the Volcano, which is the vaporizer I use. It's a registered medical device for lung cancer patients in Germany where it was made. So, this is something that has been tried and true tested for a very long time in scientific studies and these kind of things. And again, I'm not here to say vaporizing's completely healthy, right? But again, if we're looking at when weighing the pros and cons, vaporizing is much, much healthier. And so the other thing too is that if you really want to taste the terpenes of the plant, well, if you combust it, they go away, right? So for me, I'm a connoisseur. Like I love, like very similar to like someone who's really into wine and likes to smell everything and feel the notes of the flavors and everything. I'm the same way with cannabis, right? So that's why I was talking about I break it up by hand. I smell it before I interact with it. When I take that first hit off the bag, because Volcano, you use a bag. If I have one in here, I'd show you. But basically, like you get to really taste the flavor, and you can also control and titrate the temperature to pull off specific cannabinoids and terpenes. So if you want to crank it to like 400 degrees Fahrenheit, anywhere from 385 to 400, you'll pretty much get everything. But say if you only want like, I don't have the chart handy, so this might be inaccurate information, but the idea will be like the same. So let's say you want just CBD, right? There's a certain temperature you can go to where you might be able to pull just CBD, but not Delta-9 THC. There's certain temperatures where if you only want certain terpenes, you can vaporize to a lower temperature and get only that. So it allows a lot more control and also variety within the overall experience. And that's why I absolutely love the vaporizer. And then when it comes to smoking apparatuses and different methods, at the end of the day, vaporizing is a lot more efficient as well. There was some stat I read, and I'm probably going to get the numbers wrong, but the idea is going to be accurate. So when you're smoking a joint or hitting a pipe, there's a lot of smoke that's just getting left out into the air, right? When you're vaporizing, especially with like the Volcano, you're blowing a bowl of flour into a bag, and that bag is sitting there. So you're not losing any of that. And so it's a much more effective way to save a lot of money on consuming cannabis as well. And so with pipes, joints, things like that, for me personally, like again, I have hit a lot of pipes, I've hit a lot of joints, a lot of blunts in the past, things like that. I just didn't like the way that it made my lungs feel. As a fitness enthusiast, as someone who's obsessed with health, I started realizing like I'm going to stop lying to myself that this is going to be okay moving forward. Because again, I look at the results I want in terms of who I listen to. So when I listen to Paul Chek or any of these, people that have been my gurus in life, and they're all saying the same thing, and I like the results they're getting in life, that's who I'm going to listen to, versus the person who, again, might be an amazing person, but just isn't my flavor of ice cream when it comes to, people coming into the dispensary like, oh, smoking cannabis is fine as they're hacking. I'm like, yeah, hey, you might fully believe that, and that's cool for you. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, but I don't like that result, and therefore I'm going to listen to info from people that are getting the result I want.
It's amazing.
good information. This episode is chock full with all information. Like,
I love this stuff.
Yeah, and it shows. I want to give you space to talk about anything you got going on right now and how people can connect with you and if they're interested in learning more.
Yeah, first, Farron, Heather, this has been absolutely amazing. You guys are amazing hosts. Thanks for asking incredible questions. I'd love to do a part 2 because I know like when we do these, it's such a deep dive and it's so much fun that sometimes I'm like, oh my God, we didn't even attack this thing or that thing. It's awesome. And so anytime you guys want me back on, I'm happy to come back on and do round 2. And if anyone's looking to connect with me, the best place is Instagram at The Real Ryan Sprague. My last name is Sprague. Shoot me a DM. I love chatting with people. It's one of my favorite parts of all the work I do. If you're looking for the podcasts and all the releases I do on the Highly Optimized podcast and the This One Time on Psychedelics podcast, you can dive into the business profile at highly.optimized. And then if you're looking to sign up on the wait list for the Conscious Cannabis Collective, which is everything we do, the full Connect with Cannabis program where you can be a certified cannabis coach, how to cultivate the plant yourself, and 12 months of mentorship where we're going to be having guest speakers come in. We're going to be leveraging my network. You're going to be able to have so much fun in there. There's so much info we packed into there. You can head to highlyoptimized.me, download the free Conscious Cannabis Guide, and get yourself on the wait list today. That is something that out of everything I've done, this is bringing all of the stuff I've done together, and we have a crazy deal for it that we're only going to be doing for this wait list. So that's where you can find me. Also, like I said, the podcast, if you want to check those out, I have a ton of fun on those as well. And so guys, for anyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in. There's so many different things vying for our attention these days. And so anyone who tuned in this far, I really appreciate you. So thank you again, guys. This is amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll include everything in the show notes. And I also have more questions, so I would love to have you back again. This was an awesome conversation. Thank you
maybe
so
after
much,
maybe it's after we consciously use it and see, because now you've gotten
we'll get Heather in.
We'll do a part 2.
Yes, let's go. Yes, we can help you integrate in live color.
Oh, love that. Some in real time coaching for sure.
Yeah, an in real time conversation.
I am down.
Thank you so much, Ryan. This was so informational and kind of expansive in terms of working with cannabis. So seriously, so much gratitude.
Thank you. Thank you so much for charging my battery, ladies. This is amazing.
Thanks. Got it. Love it. I love those things.
Yes.
All right. I am going to